One of the things I love about Utah is that you could be a missionary here and not have to learn a different language. I think there's two things about Utah that make it unique. One, just the Western culture itself. But then second, Utah being the predominant place for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The state itself is probably anywhere from 65 to 80% LDS. What makes that challenging, at least now, for Christians, I think, is Christians, I feel like, are trapped in the middle. And what I mean by that is that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints look on us with suspicion because we're not LDS. But in Utah, there's also a very vocal minority of what's called anti-religious. And so they're suspicious of us because they just group us in with the LDS. They don't see really any difference. And so basically we're the religious minority. The last time I checked, only 3% of Utah's population went to a non-LDS church. So that 3% includes Roman Catholics, mainline Protestants, and evangelicals. Egypt, the country of Egypt, is 8%. So even though it's in the US, even though it's in the West, Utah is just a really unique place to do ministry, and especially to do church planting. But it's a phenomenal place as well.
My background is a little bit interesting compared to probably most of the PCA teaching elders in our denomination. I did grow up in the LDS church. My parents were, fourth or fifth generation Latter-day Saints. And I moved to Utah when I was 9 with my family and have basically lived here ever since. I left the Mormon Church when I was 18 when I left for college, and to make a long story short, never looked back. And was converted at the age of 25 and felt the call to ministry 4 or 5 years after I was converted. We do not have specific outreach ministries to LDS men and women. One of the things that we're passionate about is that they would come to our worship service and hear the gospel preached with authority from the pulpit. The most important thing, I believe, for anyone, including people in the LDS church who have left the LDS church, is that they would come and sit under the preached word, see the sacraments being administered rightfully, see the church being the church, because they have a very skewed understanding of what the church is. They think of a prophet and a first and second counselor and 12 other men who get to tell them everything that they should believe. And so we spend most of our time trying to explain the gospel, live the gospel, rather than try to find ways to get them to come into our door. We want them to hear and experience the sweetness of Jesus Christ when they do.
More people are leaving Mormonism now for any number of reasons. Cultural issues, political polarization. But with that, more and more people have access to the history of the Mormon Church. So some of the things that Joseph Smith said, some of the things that he did, same with Brigham Young, and people are turned off by that. When someone leaves Mormonism, they're leaving their family, their history, their culture, their social contacts, their job, networking, all of that they're having to leave behind. So it's really difficult for someone to come out of the Mormon faith, but it's happening.
I think so many of us come here, I've been here almost 9 years now, and you think, oh, I'll just preach about grace and all these Mormons will come running and my church will explode. And that never happens. There's actually a lot of good things about the Mormon Church, right? That in terms of caring for one another, they do as good as anybody. So how do we reach them? Now, what I discovered is it doesn't work to reach them by just offering a community cookout or a kids event, because that's not what they're looking for in one sense. They had that sort of thing in the LDS Church. What they're looking for actually, I think, is a better story and a real understanding of the God who made all of this and His love for them. The things that are most needed to reach people here in Utah is actually, one, just the simple means of grace that we offer, right? The preaching of the Word, ministry of the Word, and then two, a good website that connects those things to the people, because they all are going to spend a lot of time learning about God online before they show up in church. And because it's such a personal thing, they won't be willing to necessarily talk to people about it for a while.
I had sort of started looking for a church ever since we had kids, but just kind of didn't realize that there were other churches other than the LDS church. So just kind of one day I realized there were other churches that we could look into, and I found this church online and walked in the doors, and it was just so welcoming, and it's just really, we've got to know Jesus here.
When we sat down for the sermon that first day we were here, it was on Psalm 37, which has become one of my favorite Psalms. And it was just that first sentence, do not fret. You know, you hear people being changed, by God's word. It was those words that really got my attention.
Growing up in Utah, it really is so much a part of the culture, the LDS faith. So even though we didn't go there, we're definitely familiar with the teachings, and I think that both of us before we came here would have said we were not good enough to be at church. And it was so comforting to realize no one is good enough to be for Christ, but He came and met us where we were not good enough and paved the way so that we could be here and gave us this opportunity to be close to Him and have a relationship with Him.
The way that the rest of the PCA could help is, one, certainly praying for Utah. I mean, everybody's going to say that, and yet I'm convinced it is God who has His elect here, and many of them don't know Him yet. And over again, I see God drawing people to Himself. And so I think Utah is a great place to learn ministry. And so if anyone wanted to come out to do internships or send mission trips out here, we have to learn, how do we live as Christians in a culture that has no Christian background, right? Which is really going to be more and more applicable for the rest of the United States. Utah is in some ways on the forefront of that. So I think if you can learn to do ministry here, you'll be equipped to do ministry anywhere.
I think there's a temptation over time to kind of circle the wagons and to say, well, we're not going to be able to break into their culture, so let's go ahead and form our own culture, a mini culture. But it doesn't work. That isn't the way the gospel works. So as we develop those relationships with Christians, brothers and sisters, God convicted us that to reach out to those in the community was to accept that that's just a huge part of what this place is.
I think other churches throughout the U.S. could learn from the churches here in Utah in thinking through how to exist as a minority, how to not have influence or power or control, but simply learn how to interact with unbelievers, how to welcome them into their home, how to present Jesus in a winsome, gracious, loving way. I think what we're left with is the power of the Spirit, lifting up Jesus and serving people who don't understand us, who maybe hate us, who think we're dangerous. And to respond to that with humility instead of being louder, throwing more money at things. If nothing else, I think that's what we're doing pretty well out here.